Okay, so we're working on the solving equations by factoring worksheet. We did the first few of these problem set in class, so I will be doing 14 along with you guys, so follow along and let's make this work, yeah? So, to start this problem off, we'd set up the magic X. And we should understand we're solving by factoring, so that means that we want to, I'm going to make this a little bigger. All right, what we want to do is factor before we start solving, okay? So, we'll line up our equal signs, we'll put 0 right here, and we know we'll need 2 blank parentheses. We're going to put an R in both of these places, and then we're going to start thinking about what the sign should be in these 2 places right here, right? Because this number is positive and the middle term is negative, that means that we're going to need to have 2 negatives in this case, right? So I have a negative here and a negative there. All right, now we'll fill out the magic X, and I usually recommend having your whole parentheses and everything set up before you even fill out your magic X, yeah? So now, we put our numbers where they go, okay? A times C. We should know that A is the number in front of our squared, our quadratic term, okay? So that's an invisible 1. B is a negative 10, and C is positive 24. So, in this case, we have to put 2 numbers that would go in here to make sure that we have something that would actually multiply up to 24. So we would need a list of numbers that actually make 24. Alright, so in this case, we would look at 1 times 24. We always start our list with that. And then we got 2 times 12. And once we get to 3 times 8, we can see that we went too far, right? Because we need 2 numbers that multiply up to positive 24 that add up to negative 10, right? And so, wait. That was all wrong. All right, I got distracted. Sorry, though. Someone knocked at the door. All right, so we got 4 times 6. Now we're perfect. All right, because when this number is positive, we'll be looking for 2 numbers that have a sum of 10. And in this case, we saw both of them would be negative. Okay, so when I do negative 4 and negative 6, right, that gives me negative 10, and multiplying a negative times a negative gives me a positive 24. So in this case, we'd have negative 4 and negative 6. Yeah. So in this case, we have only to solve the equation, okay? We did the first step, which is factor it. The next step is going to be to solve both of these and set them both equal to 0. So I would write r minus 4 equals 0. Then we put the word or. R minus 6 equals 0. And now we have to solve these 2 equations. Okay, so this last step is important. We'd be adding 4 to both sides here. And we would see that r is now equal to positive 4. In this equation, we'd be adding 6 to both sides. And so we'd see that we would get r is equal to positive 6. And we'd have the word or in between those 2 solutions, right? So this problem would be complete now. We see we got 2 different solutions, and make sure that you set it up. Okay, again, the first step would be factor and then solve. All right, and we have to solve both of those equations. So we're going to move on to one that's slightly more difficult in this next example. We're going to do 15. Change our mind, let's do 16. All right, so in this case, again, line up your equal signs. Okay, because we have them equal to 0 when we solve this equation, we're going to want to use the 0 product property, but this is like the next level of difficulty because we have a leading coefficient this time that's not 1, right? In this case, our A looks like it's 5. And we'd rather not do that, right? If we were going to set up our magic X and just start solving this, we'd have our A, C, and our B. And in this case, 5 times 40 makes 200. And that's going to be a long list of numbers, so our first instinct should actually be, wait a minute, I don't want to do that. Is there a common factor? Is there a greatest common factor that we could take out? So the observation you want to make is that all of these coefficients are all multiples of 5. And so we would take the 5 outside, and then we're going to divide each of these numbers by 5. So 5 divided by 5 is 1, so we have 1n squared. 30 divided by 5 is 6, so we'd have 6n. And 40 divided by 5 is 8, so we would have 8. Again, so the idea is that the 5 did not disappear, but it just kind of lives outside here now. Okay, and if I was to distribute that 5 to all these other terms, we would have something equal to what we started with. So now is the step where we want to set up our magic x, okay? So first thing we would do, have the 5 here, give me 2 blank parentheses, and then what we're going to do is put in numbers into the correct locations, right? We would have an n in each parentheses, and because all of our terms are positive, we'd have a plus sign in both of these, okay? And now we set up the magic x. When we started, we had a coefficient of 5, but now we factored it so that we have this expression right here. And this expression is the one we want to factor. So we're going to use a to be 1 and c to be 8. So 1 times 8 makes 8, and in this case b is now 6. So we go through and finish up this problem by looking at factors of 8, like 1 times 8, and then we check to see if they add up to 6, right? 1 plus 8 is not 6, so we keep going, okay? 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 plus 4 is 6. So we found the correct numbers. So we go put those in the places where they go. And now, to finish solving the equation, because we've just done the first step of factoring, now we need to solve the equation by setting these two equations equal to 0. So we'll do n plus 4 equals 0, or n plus 2 equals 0. And then we will subtract 4 from both sides yesterday. Yesterday I had a student that, a brilliant student, asked the question. They said, what happens to the 5? Okay? What happens to the 5 right here? Right? And it doesn't come into play right here because we have these two expressions that multiply up to 0. And the idea is that that's all we care about, right? We know that one of these things must be equal to 0, right? Either 5 is equal to 0, n plus 4 is equal to 0, or n plus 2 is equal to 0. But 5 is equal to 5. All right? 5 is not equal to 0. So that's why we only really have to worry about the other two expressions. Okay, if I take 2 from both sides, we get n equals negative 2. All right? So this problem would be completed now because we have the two solutions. And I would say that you guys should try 15 right now on your own in the case that you didn't do that one. I'm going to skip over that one and try to move on to the more challenging problems, like number 19, that I've got multiple questions on today. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at 19. All right, so now we have an added degree of difficulty for number 19, right? The problem is that we do not have this equation equal to 0. So we have a few problems that we have to deal with here, right? I could try to make a new page and make sure that you guys have the ideas of what are we really doing here, all right? The steps to solve these problems. Okay, the steps to solve by factoring. Okay, number 1 would be set the equation equal to 0. All right, set it equal to 0. If it's not equal to 0, then make it equal to 0, and we're going to practice that step. A lot of times you have that done for you, in which case you don't have to worry about it. In our last examples, we had everything already set equal to 0, but in this example we're doing on 19, that's not done. So that will be the first thing. After you set it equal to 0, then you want to consider factoring out the greatest common factor, the GCF, greatest common factor, okay? If there is no common factor, then obviously there's nothing you could do about that. But if there is a common factor, then you need to factor that out, okay? Step 3 would be factor the polynomial. after you factor that, then this has been the step that feels weird, right? We need to set both factors equal to 0. Set both factors equal to 0. And then we solve. Okay, so this process got more complicated from the examples that we had at the beginning. Okay, so that last step, number 5, would be solve both of those equations that we set up. So this could be something you take a screenshot of if you're watching this on your phone or on your Chromebook, whatever. But make sure that you understand all these steps because the process has become more complicated. All right, so set it equal to 0. Factor out the greatest common factor. Then factor the polynomial. All right, in this step number 3, that would be where we draw our little magic X thing, right? That would be where you have the AC and the X and the plus B. Okay, so we're just breaking down the process here. And like I said, we'll have to do some examples to make sense of this. So that first step set it equal to 0. And that's why I'm going to add 5 to both sides. Alright? I picked 5 because I know that negative 5 plus 5 is going to give me 0. Now we'll simplify everything else on the left-hand side. And I know negative 149 plus 5 is 144. So in this case, what I want to do is now try to factor out a 3, right? That's what we said step 2 was, right? After you set it equal to 0, try to factor out the greatest common factor. And that means you have to look at the numbers and see if there is a common factor. Are these two numbers that I just underlined, is this one a multiple of 3? Is 144 a multiple of 3? And they are. And I got a lot of students asking me, like, can we use a calculator on this, right? Because they want to go faster, right? They want to get an A on this thing and make sure it's perfect, right? And so, yeah, I guess if you use the calculator, it could still mess you up. Because maybe you don't know why you're dividing a certain number. But in this case, yeah, you might be able to go to your calculator and do 144 divided by 3. And if you did that, you would get negative 48. Okay? So we did the next step, right? We set it equal to 0. That's this step. Then we factored out the greatest common factor. That's this step right here. Now what we want to do is factor this actual polynomial that we made here. Okay, and for that step, we need the magic X. So we'll use our magic X here. We're going to set that up together. Okay, I would highly recommend that if you're doing this on your own right now, that you try to figure out what numbers would go in the spots for AC and for B. Okay, trying on. I'm going to give you guys like a little extra beat so that you guys can figure that out. What numbers should go in those two places? All right, because I'm factoring this one, we have an invisible 1 for A, and C is negative 48. So that's going to make negative 48 for us, okay? Then they have to add up to negative 2. I've been trying to tell you guys, when we have a negative number, that's our product, we'll be looking for two numbers that are 2 units away. So we could make a list of numbers and write them all down. 1 times 48, 2 times 24, 3 times 16. We could keep going down the list, right? 4 times 12. And then finally we get to 6 times 8. And we see that those are 2 units apart and they have a product of 48, right? And when we factor, we usually want to have this thing set up already, right? We should have our 2 blank parentheses, our variable, and we should think about what sign goes in there. Okay, we know that we have 2 numbers that are going to multiply up to a negative. So I know I'll have to have a positive and a negative there. It's got to be like that. So this is the part where you guys got to choose which one's the positive, which one's the negative. And if you're watching this, maybe you could try to do it before I do, right? Which one would you think is the negative? The 6 or the 8? All right, and in this case, because they have to add up to a negative, the bigger number should be the negative. So I'll put the minus 8 here and the positive 6 there. So now for this last step, we factored it. We want to set both of these factors equal to 0. I'm going to set this equal to 0, and that means that I'm going to write x plus 6 equals 0. Then we write the word or. And then I'm going to set x minus 8 equal to 0 also. And then we're going to solve these two equations. All right? These aren't that bad. Take 6 from both sides. And then I get x equals negative 6. And in this case, I'll add 8 to both sides. And we would get x equals 8. So don't forget that we have two solutions here. Okay, we got x equals negative 6 or x equals positive 8. Okay, so that's number 19. Like I said, this step is like one of the more difficult ones, and that was like step 5 when you're finally done. So you want to go through the whole process and make sure you understand where you're breaking down. Okay, I think when I got multi-step problems to teach, everybody can fall off at a different step, and if you don't know where it is that you get lost, it's harder for me to help you. So you want to figure out where you get stuck, all right? So I'm going to try to get one more example in here on this video before I pause it, because I think the students got to go to their next class. All right, so I would highly recommend, if you're watching this one, when I pull up the next example, that you try it on your own. Just pause the video and see if you can do this on your own. All right, so if you didn't press pause yet, press pause. Come on, try it on your own, please. All right, otherwise, I'm going to jump in right now and get the problem going. Okay, step 1 would be set it equal to 0. And I see a positive 5. And I want a 0 on this side of the equal sign. So that means I'm going to subtract 5 from both sides of the equation. So I'm going to get 6n plus 78n plus 240. All right. If I was to set up the magic x at this step, we would see that that's going to give me 6 times 240, and we probably wouldn't want to do that, right? We should think about it to ourselves, like, can I factor out a 6 from all of these numbers? And it looks like, yeah, 6 times 4 is 24, so 6 times 40 must be 240, right? So now we just got to figure out, is there 6 times something that gives us 78? All right? So think about that for a second. Because the answer is yes, right? There is a number that we can multiply by 6 to get 78, and that would be 13, right? 6 times 13 is 78. And so I divided all these terms by 6. So now we made it to the step where we factored out the greatest common factor, and the greatest common factor in this case was 6, right? We were able to take that out. So now what we're going to do is complete the problem by factoring and setting up our magic x. Okay, so like I said, give the two blank parentheses. Put the letter in each place. Put a plus, because we know all these signs are positive. So both of those will be positive. All right, this would be a good place to check for understanding, right? Pause the video real quick if you need and figure out what numbers go in these two places. All right? Our a in this case is now an invisible 1. So 1 times 40 makes 40, and our b is 13. So we want to come up with two numbers that would have a product of 40 and a sum of 13, right? So we go through the list. 1 times 40, 2 times 20, 3 times nothing, 4 times 10, okay, and 5 times 8. All right, and here we go. Wait, 5 plus 8 is 13. So we know we got a 5 and an 8. And in this case, we would put a 5 here and an 8 there. And we made it to the last step. All we have to do is set these two expressions equal to 0. And solving these won't be too hard. All right? Don't forget the word or right there. All right, so I take 5 from both sides. And we would get n equals negative 5. In this case, I'll take 8 from both sides, and we'll get n equals negative 8. All right, so this video is about 20 minutes long, so I'll probably cut it off in a second so that we can have a separate video for the case that's going to be more confusing, where we're about to start getting fractions and dealing with those. So I wish you guys luck studying that part too. All right, this video covered 19 and 20 and some of the first half. We're going to get deeper into the back page and the rest of this now, all right? Good luck.